Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at American University's School of International Service, where we are speaking to a distinguished scholar in residence, Dr. Nora Bensahel, who's the team with General Barno in the Barno-Bensahel team, who pays a lot of attention to Afghanistan and all matters national security, U.S. Army in particular. And I wanted to also note that she is a graduate of my high school, our high school, Hunter College High School, in New York City. So big shout out to HCHS. Nora, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So the president had his major address last night, did discuss what his strategy and his vision was. Era of nation building is over. We've heard that before. And also that the mission is going to be sort of more of killing terrorists, putting pressure on Kabul to do more, to the Afghans to do more, putting pressure on Pakistan to rein in some of these terror groups, and also calling on NATO to step up its commitment. And I wanted to ask you, and bring a whole of government approach. Again, something that we've heard in terms of Afghanistan. Here we are now, the 16th year that this mission is going on at this point. From your standpoint, what did you like about the strategy and what the president said, and where do you think it could use some improvement as somebody who spent a large chunk of your professional career looking at this very, very closely and analyzing this conflict?
I think what was most surprising about the president's speech is that he essentially doubled down on the strategy that we've had for many years in Afghanistan. Although he went to great pains to distance it from the Obama-era strategy, it is very consistent with what President Obama was doing, and even with what some of President George W. Bush was doing before him. He went to great pains to contrast specific things that President Obama did, in particular putting some restrictions on the number and type of U.S. forces and how they could be used, and also announcing a timeline for withdrawal. So he did say that he wasn't going to do those things. But other than that, this is remarkably consistent with what we've been doing for many, many years in Afghanistan now, despite the fact that we know that the president seriously considered all range of options, from many, many more troops to going down literally to zero.
There is talk that it's going to be 4,000 troops, even though the president declined to be specific about that. Is that enough? I mean, the critics of this say that we weren't able to succeed with nearly 300,000 or 200,000 troops there at the height of the mission, large bulk of those being American forces. And if you include contractors and other folks, it was hundreds of thousands of people. If we couldn't succeed then, how are we going to succeed now? Especially when the solution lies in Afghanistan sorting out its own problems with corruption. H.R. McMaster, as a brigadier general, was focused on that in the task force to try to fight corruption. How does this work with an economy of force with a small amount of soldiers? I mean, does that 4,000 extra troops really make a difference?
Well, the president really didn't talk about a strategic objective last night other than winning and defeating the terrorists, but that's too broad to be an objective for a military strategy. What he in fact said he would do, although he obviously didn't talk about the specifics, but the types of things he said he would do, really are not going to deal a decisive blow against the Taliban. The numbers of troops that we're hearing, about 4,000 troops, even if you doubled or tripled that, that's not going to be enough to defeat the Taliban. We weren't able to do that when we had 100,000 U.S. troops there, and we know the president isn't considering that because he made very clear that we are not going to be doing nation building and so on, which would imply many, many more troops. So the best you can really hope for with the type of troop levels that we're likely to see is keeping this at a stalemate. Right? The president was very clear in outlining, I thought very honestly, that he had resisted leaving any troops, but that he saw the dangers of that he realized that the terrorist threat would grow if the United States rapidly withdrew from Afghanistan, which I do believe is correct. But the types of things that he talked about last night, despite the rhetoric of we're going to win and we're going to defeat the terrorists, none of that is actually going to be able to achieve that at the types of troop levels and the type of strategy that he was talking about. The best that can be done, and I think that, even though this isn't a great, great rallying cry for the nation to rally around, keeping it at a stalemate, as awful as that is as a strategic outcome, may be the best option for the United States to pursue. Because what it would take to utterly defeat the Taliban is something we're not willing to do, and frankly, given the weaknesses of the government and given the weaknesses of the Afghan forces, may simply be something that we're not able to do. So keeping it at a stalemated faction where we do increase our support and advisory support, probably some air support as well to the Afghan forces, all of those are things that are well within than our ability to do with a few thousand more troops. Those things may improve the capabilities of the Afghan forces. They may keep the government in control of more territory or be able to take back some of it. But we are not looking at any type of increase that is going to fundamentally turn the tide in what is a stalemated military but also political situation in the country.
Do you he called on NATO members to do more, to engage. I was in Brussels just a few months ago, and there didn't seem to be a lot of appetite in order to pony up more combat forces. Do you sense that European nations and our NATO allies are going to be interested in stepping up, especially when you regard the president's low popularity rating in a lot of these countries? It's a two-part question. First, do you think that our allies are going to cough up forces? And does the president's low popularity rating in these countries complicate our efforts to garner our allies' support for this long-running mission?
NATO is not, and its members are not particularly looking forward to deploying more troops into this fight. They are really, many of the allies have sent a lot of people into combat, have taken a lot of casualties proportionately compared to their populations during certain periods, as many casualties, if not more, than the United States has. So there isn't an overwhelming desire to put large numbers of troops back in Afghanistan among the NATO members. There has been some willingness to increase the numbers a little bit. I actually saw something in the past couple of days that NATO is about to do that, but that's from a previous request, not what the president was talking about last night. He may be able to get a little bit more assistance. Yes, he is incredibly unpopular in Europe, but the nations, the leaders of those countries, the NATO members, the heads of government, are very concerned about what they heard about NATO on the campaign trail from then candidate Trump, and also what they perceive, and I think rightly so, as his inconsistent messaging on Article 5, the mutual defense clause that is at the heart of the alliance that says an attack on one will be treated as an attack against all. He has berated NATO and told members to contribute more to their own security in order for the United States to support NATO. They have taken some steps towards that, though it's not clear that it's because of what Trump has said. They are moving in that direction. And so the low popularity among the publics in these countries may not translate into as much overt pressure on the governments to distance themselves, because they are very concerned about maintaining a strong NATO. The types of additional forces that they may have to pony up in order to feel that they've achieved that goal may still be relatively low, and they may not choose to do anything additional in response to what the president said either. They do have quite a number of troops on the ground there now.
And let me ask you about Pakistan. Everybody has recognized what the challenge with Pakistan is. Every American administration has fought this battle. Bush administration fought it. The Obama administration fought it. The relationship did fray, particularly after the bin Laden raid. Is this pressure policy going to work either in Kabul or in Islamabad, ultimately, when the Pakistanis look at these sort of forces as irregulars in their broader conflict with India, and President Trump, rightfully or not, called for India to play a bigger role, which normally is kind of a red flag for the Pakistanis?
Yeah, he called on India to play more of an economic role, and I think he was very careful about how he spoke about that, precisely because of this issue of wanting to be strong on Pakistan and to try to induce them to cooperate with the United States more. But I don't know how he's going to achieve that in real terms. The United States, over the past 16 years, has taken very tough lines on Pakistan at certain points, less tough lines at other points when it seemed that those approaches weren't working. I mean, neither approach, being hard on them or soft on them, has actually gotten them to move in the direction that U.S. interests would like to see them move. So it's not clear to me what we're actually going to do that's fundamentally different from the past, despite the president's rhetoric, because the Pakistanis, understandably, have their own interests. They live in that neighborhood. They're going to be there long after the United States is. And so I'm not sure what type of pressure we can be exerting on Pakistan, other than doing things like putting specific members of their intelligence services, on economic sanctions lists and other things. We could technically do that, but I don't see how that would link to the kind of outcomes and the working with the United States that the president would like to see them do.
And let me ask you one last question about the whole of government approach. I know I appreciate that. We've been talking about whole of government for a long time, dating to the Clinton administration and even further back. But What are some of the challenges? Because the State Department has dismantled its Office of Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. Some of the cuts the administration is proposing are hitting the State Department really hard. Talk to us about whole of government and what that actually should mean if you're trying to play an active and engaged role in this conflict where you do have to bring all arms of national power to try to help achieve your aims, not just the military arm, which is the primary lever that people tend to pull.
Yeah, we've been talking about needing to bring the whole of government together in Afghanistan and Iraq as well since 2004. The problem is the way that our government is structured and the way that we choose to allocate our money through Congress, we have never resourced the civilian side of government for these types of operations, on the ground and civilian capacity, but also in the diplomatic capacity and the foreign service capacity that would be necessary to truly do that. Again, this is a long-standing trend that goes back, through the 1990s and far earlier than that. But I had to laugh out loud when I heard that line from from President Trump last night, because this is something we have tried and we have utterly failed at for a long time. We had the quote unquote civilian surge to go in Afghanistan to go along with the military surge in 2010 into 2011, which even so was able to generate relatively little civilian capacity. So we've never done this well. But then when you look at what the Trump administration has proposed for development, for diplomacy, for economic activities abroad, for foreign aid, the president's proposed budget cuts the State Department budget by 38%. So at a time when we're cutting, we don't know if that budget will go through. I don't think that it actually will to those levels. But appointments in the State Department far lag the Defense Department, for example. At a time when we are not investing in that capacity, but quite the contrary, are cutting it from what was already a level that was proved to be insufficient. I just don't see where that civilian capacity is going to come from. I thought that was the part of the president's speech that, while it may make sense rhetorically and may make people feel good, was by far the least practical and just outright infeasible given the current environment today.
What does and I know you touched on this before, but if you were going to, if you were the one who was going to build that strategy, or you and Dave Barno were going to be building that strategy, what would that strategy look like? What does the strategy the United States needs to apply over the long term, not just in Afghanistan, but the region, have to be to advance and preserve, as the president rightly always talks about, U.S. interests in the region and in U.S. strategic interests at home?
Yeah, I'm going to speak only for myself. I'm not going to speak for someone else's views on this. Again, the fundamental question is there a theory of victory here? Is there a way for us to get to a point where we can withdraw from an Afghanistan that doesn't necessarily resemble the United States? I don't think anyone in the military or diplomacy communities actually think that that's possible, much less desirable. The real question is, can we leave something behind that's stable enough so that when the United States leaves, it doesn't all crumble instantly? That's probably the best that we're going to get. And it's very clear from a president who just examined, all options, who came in saying, I want to get out. The fact that he was convinced to say we're basically going to follow the same strategy that we've been following, for the past several years, really speaks to the impossible conundrum of getting to that objective. As I said, for the foreseeable future, the best we may be able to hope for, as unsatisfying and as unglamorous as it is to be able to maintain the stalemate and make very small increments of progress so that at some point, a long time in the future, maybe the Afghan government can stand on its own, maybe the political dynamics in the country change. Those are not things we're going to be able to affect. If the key question is whether the United States will maintain the resolve to stay committed to that over time, of course. And I think that as long as the casualty levels, tragic though they are, if they remain as low as they've been for the past couple of years, I don't see the American public clamoring to get out. Yes, one of the things that candidate Trump ran for office on was America first and non-interventionism, and I think he will get some pushback from his right on this for having abandoned those principles and gone with, a more traditional plan that was recommended by his generals. But I don't think it's going to lose him that much public support, again, as long as the casualty rates remain relatively low. I think people will, among his supporters, will not defect from, his views from voting for him, from supporting him because of that. If the casualties go up and it looks more costly, I think we're in a whole different ballgame, and any president would have to reconsider the type of strategy I talked about.
And and let me ask you one last question. How quickly would Afghanistan collapse if U.S. and NATO forces did withdraw? And what are the implications of it? Would it be a Syria-like situation where there could be a domino effect across the region?
It would certainly have ripple effects throughout the region. I don't know that you can say it's a very clear domino that, Afghanistan falls and then this happens and play that out. But I think if the U.S. forces were to withdraw, it would not take that long. I can't, give you a timetable, but, we would see events unfold fairly rapidly as an emboldened Taliban, which already controls large portions of the country, would be emboldened to push into parts that it doesn't now control, and in particular that they would be able to continue to pressure the political system. The government would fall, I think, due to the pressure. And then once there is not even a legitimately elected government, to the extent that it is seen as legitimate among its public, which it is not entirely, that sets off a whole cascade of dynamics once the government were to fall that would have incredibly unpredictable effects both inside Afghanistan and rippling throughout the rest of the region as well.
Nora, thank you so much. We really appreciate it, and always love talking to you about this. Go Hunter.
Thanks very much for having me.